Welcome. Welcome to another episode of The Impact of AI, where each week we discuss and explore how AI can impact us both professionally and personally. For those of you whom I've not met, my name's Melissa Drew, and I'll be your host for this week. This week, we are going to dive into AI and the impact of augmenting human activity in a positive way through the advancement of AI with ASAPP, and more specifically with Ryan McDonald, the chief scientist of ASAPP. Ryan comes to us with a doctorate from University of Pennsylvania, where he's focused on machine learning methods for structured prediction and natural language processing. He has published over hundreds of research papers and speaks regularly at international conferences. And his book, called Dependency Parsing, has served as the primary resource for syntactic parsing for the past 10 years. Welcome, Ryan.
Thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here.
Oh, this is going to be good. We haven't had a deep dive into this topic yet. At this point, everybody knows that I stalk everybody on LinkedIn. One of the things that we look at is your journey. So, for example, you did start your journey, in the education with philosophy and computer science, and then you got your doctorate in computer and information sciences. So you're one of those rare individuals that you started your journey in technology and continued all the way to where you are today. But I'm sure that you still have a story that you can share with us.
Yeah, sure. I've certainly been in technology, been working on artificial intelligence for many, many years, 2 decades, basically. But of course, even in those 2 decades, things change, your interests change, and the sorts of things you work on change. As you said, I was studying computer science and philosophy at the University of Toronto, and I got a great opportunity to work on a project that was summarizing news for mobile devices, which doesn't sound too, crazy now, but this was in, I think, 1999 or something like that. So, the World Wide Web was only less than 10 years old, and certainly in North America and around the world, not many people had mobile phones with them. So
when you say, I'm thinking back to my life, summarizing the news on mobile phones. So if I go all the way back to the late 90s, that used to be called clipping services.
Yeah. But this was even trying to do something a little bit more intelligent. What we were really trying to solve was, CNN, New York Times, these articles, the format of the HTML was for you to look at it on a 15-inch, 17-inch computer screen. And people didn't have mobile-friendly versions of content, right? And so we were trying to extract out the sort of salient parts so that you could see it all in your little screen, tables and things like that, extract those out and try to display them in nice ways. So it was also, partly about the formatting or the form of the information, as well as the salience in extracting it. But yeah, that was a great opportunity with the professor, Gerald Penn at the University of Toronto, and it really got me interested in artificial intelligence, and in particular, artificial intelligence for understanding language, documents, natural language processing, basically. And then I went on to my PhD at the University of Pennsylvania, where I was very interested in understanding the structure of language. So, how can computers figure out verbs, nouns? How do these words connect to make larger syntactic structures and eventually semantic meaning? And what can we do with those? How can we improve technology like summarization and that? And that was sort of, a very hot topic at the time, and it still is. A lot of people do work on that still. Around that time, Google was becoming a behemoth. It was clear that there was all sorts of interesting stuff happening at Google. I had some connections to it, so I was fortunate to get a job there, which was my first foray really into with machine learning and natural language processing, seeing what happens when the rubber hits the road, right? Like how do these things, when you put them in front of users and people interact with them on a day-to-day basis, what happens? How can you add value with machine learning and NLP, which now honestly seems obvious, right? Like, of course there's value in these things, but back in 2006 or whenever it was, that wasn't so clear at that time. And so that was a lot of fun. And when I was there, I focused on a lot of consumer products. So obviously search, Google Assistant, Translate, that was a big one, obviously a very, at that point, nascent, but becoming very powerful and valuable technology at that time. And that offered, lots of challenges. How do you scale these things to handle the amount of users that are interacting with it? How do you account for different use cases and everything? And that was really enlightening to just see and understand that, machine learning and NLP, from an academic standpoint, we often sort of build models, look at accuracies, look at, the results on data sets, and get an idea that, oh, this is working well, or, I have 80% accuracy. And then to really feel that, well, there's still a huge amount of work to be done once that model is done. If you're going to put that in front of someone and they're going to really stress test it, everything you have to do around that model to make sure that it doesn't fail in spectacular ways. And it still does once in a while, but, is actually, 90% of the work in that case. And that was just enlightening to see, and also, exhilarating just to be involved in that process. And, my journey kind of continued. Enterprise AI started to really build up, in the past 10 years. And I started to get interested in the space. It had a bunch of different research challenges when you compare it to something like consumer natural language processing and machine learning, around domain adaptation, low data. A lot of enterprise companies don't have a lot of data. They have to, supply that data in real time, on the fly, what have you. But on the other hand, unlike consumer technology, you have partners who are actually paying significant money for those services. So they're willing to engage with you to really try to, push the needle and see what the machine learning can do. So yeah, that was very interesting to get into that space. And then, around that time, ASAPP came on my radar. I was very interested in how natural language processing and machine learning can be used to really positively, not necessarily, replace human activity, but in very high value situations, how can we augment what they're doing to sort of increase their efficiency, increase the amount of value that's being added to that activity, whether it's something, someone writing a policy paper, or a lawyer, working through a case and doing all sorts of case review, or in the case that ASAPP is really focused on, is the customer care case. So yeah, it was on my radar, and I was very excited with the mission. So kind of the next step in my journey, as it was to join ASAPP.
Which then now brings us to ASAPP. So a little bit more about what is ASAPP, because I did go online and I looked at the website, and I think, in talking to you, it's a little bit clearer, where the focus is. It's around the customer care, it's around the impact in the customer journey, but I'd like to get your perspective.
Sure. So, I mean, that's absolutely right. Generally, ASAPP as a company, we're an AI company. We're really focused on taking AI and using it in transformational ways to really augment human activity. Of course, we have to start somewhere, and a very big somewhere to start, a very important somewhere, is in customer care call centers, right? So this is an area that, first of all, from an economic standpoint, it's a $600 billion industry. Companies spend a lot of money on trying to make customer care as excellent as possible for all their consumers and customers. But of course, we know, everybody who's called up a helpline or whatever, we know that sometimes is not a perfect experience, and it could be made better. And it's largely, sometimes it's bots, but largely you're talking to people, whether that's over chat, whether it's over phone, and they're trying to execute something behind the scene. They're trying to help you with their problem. And to do that, it's a complex task. They have a bunch of different tools they have to use. They have to sort of multitask while solving it, look up information in databases. And so it seemed like a very ripe area to apply AI technology. So how can we augment the activity of agents at call centers in order to try to improve a number of different things? How satisfied the agents are, how many issues are getting handled every day, how satisfied the customers are. All of these things are, of course, critical things to solve.
So
And
let's pause there for a second, because if I've got someone listening and they're not fully aware of where AI can be woven into that call center, that customer experience, I could probably, think of, oh, IVR, interactive voice response, where I go on the phone, I click 2, it routes me to here, and then I get, 15 other options, and everybody hates that. So what I don't want to do is have that negative automatically at the very beginning.
yeah.
Give some, and I read some use cases that you had. I think there was one with American Airlines, and there was another one with another retail company. But let's provide a few of the use cases of what exactly does it mean beyond what people may have already thought about with customer care, because we know that customer service has databases. We know that you can run, general reports to find out how many issues they have, but I know you're doing more than that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I could kind of go through, when you call a call center, what is every step in there? And obviously, an AI right now in modern call centers, every single step of the way, as an AI is involved. IVR, chatbots, they're the obvious one that people know is happening, right? You experience it and you can see it's happening,
right?
Right. And this is containment, or routing or something like that, right? Can we contain someone's issue, get them to a self-help article, something like that, so they don't actually have to speak to a human, hopefully address their issue as fast as possible. If not, can we route them, to the right place so that they get the result as quickly as possible? We actually focus on what happens once you get to the human. Right? So, certainly we have solutions in the chatbot IVR space, but we really are excited about, okay, you're at an agent, which tends to also mean that the issue is hard, right? If it was easy, a chatbot would probably be able to deal with it. And so, yeah, so what do you do at that point? And there's a number of different things we can do. The most common ones would be, understanding the intent. Why are they calling in? What does that entail? Trying to figure out, is there a certain workflow that the agent should follow in order to solve that issue? And of course, if we can predict that, well, then we get consistency through the call center, and the agent can probably follow the steps more quickly and solve the issue more quickly. What should the agent do or say next on that workflow, right? So agents spend a lot of time, especially in digital, crafting messages, looking for the right tool to open. A lot of these agents deal in legacy systems, what we like to call Frankenstacks. They've got about 12 different pieces of software that they need to open in order to solve a single issue. How can artificial intelligence predict, what tools should they open? How should they use them? How does that interact with the conversation going back, what they should say next, in order to kind of get them along the steps as quickly as possible. Of course, after the call, which you don't see as a user, agents will spend time doing dispositioning, right? What happened in the call? They'll leave notes. This is for when you call back, because maybe your issue wasn't solved, the next person that picks it up will have a better idea of what happened along the way. Also, things like suggesting knowledge base articles, so that agents, if they're at a particularly tricky point in the conversation, they'll get the right information they need to sort of unblock what they're trying to do without having to go and search for it. So artificial intelligence is sort of at the forefront of all of these things, right? Making these suggestions, making these recommendations, sometimes suggesting so the agent can select it, or just doing it on behalf of the agent right away. And all of these things, I think, what we really care about optimizing is whatever the performance indicators are that the agents, the customers, the companies care about, right? And clearly solving issues as fast as possible and as accurately as possible is, if you get that done right, I think everybody's going to be happy at the end of the day. And all of these things are sort of driven towards those.
I was thinking about it as you're talking. I'm thinking about my own customer experience. A couple years ago, we like stories on these podcasts. So a couple years ago, I called this customer service, and I know it routed me to. I actually asked him where he was located. He was located in Manila, and I asked a question, and I could tell he was reading from a script.
Mm.
and he wasn't actually answering the question. He was just reading from a script. So I'm like, okay, I'll call back and maybe I'll get rerouted somewhere else. Well, no, I got rerouted back to Manila, spoke to a different person who literally said the exact same thing word for word because he was reading from a list.
Yeah.
And I will tell you that to this day, I have never bought anything else from that retailer since.
Mm.
So I use that as an example because you mentioned that it's not just about adding the AI, the predictive analytics, which I thought was a really interesting note because I don't think people think about predictive analytics when it comes to the customer call centers and that customer experience.
Yeah.
But if we wrap all that together, with the feedback from my story, your goal is to really increase the experience of me as a customer with that enterprise or that entity. And I mean, ultimately, that's the goal, right? Everything I'm hearing, that's the ultimate goal is I like this company. I want to continue to do business with them because talking to them is really easy.
Yeah. I would say that's right.
Okay.
I would go a little further and say
Mhm.
there's probably three parties who
Yes.
have different goals. And I don't think they're conflicting. They might seem conflicting, but they're certainly not. There's a customer, as you said, the AI is there to try to make them happy, solve the problem effectively, avoid situations like the one you encountered, right? That is, I think, aligned with the company's objectives, right? So the company whose products we call a call center, that company, if they want to keep those customers happy, they want what we call net promoter score to be high. We want those people to go and sing the praises of the company so that they get more business. But then critically, and I think this is often overlooked, is the agent themselves, right? Now, the agent wants to make the customer happy. That's always the case, right? And the more the agent can make the customer happy, I think the agent also is happy with this job. But it is a very stressful job. And they have to deal with belligerent, angry customers all the time. They have to deal, this constant changing of issues that are coming up, things that they can't anticipate, new situations that they're thrown into. And so obviously they want training, and they want all the tools that they need in order to handle those new situations, in the uncomfortable ones as well, handle them as well as possible, for their own happiness, for their own job satisfaction. Agents and call centers in America, I think the average attrition rate is about 40% a year. In some companies, it's 100% because it's a hard job. And you deal, especially the issues that they get, the easy ones went to the chatbots. They're dealing with the issues that are difficult to handle. And so we are keenly aware of that. And we also, are interested in building AI technology to handle that third party, the agent, as well.
Well, in reading, through some of the research that you've done in prepping for this, there was a reference to morphosyntactic analysis.
Yeah.
What is that?
So, right. So this is old work that I did. So morphosyntactic analysis is what I mentioned earlier, understanding the basics of language. So, the dog ate my homework. The is a determiner, dog is a noun, ate is a verb, homework is another noun. Ate is in the past tense. Dog is singular. The dog is the subject of ate. These kinds of syntactic things. Understanding what is the structure of the sentence itself. And then one level up is understanding more the semantics of the sentence itself, which is that something was being eaten. That's the predicate, and someone is the eater, and something is the thing that's being eaten, and the dog is the eater, and the homework is the thing that's being eaten. And so this is one way to represent language that for many, many years was very, very useful, and I would say the core representation in natural language processing or understanding documents. And actually today it's still impactful, especially at the semantic level, going one level up. For dialogue understanding, there's a lot of work on meaning representations, the agent informed the customer about something. The agent extracted some information. These sorts of meaning representations over dialogue structures, conversation structures, form the basis of a lot of modern artificial intelligence and analytics that we do in conversational AI.
So my experience with definitely not at the level that you're at, but in 2004, I worked with a company that had a patent in grammar-based AI, but it was specifically around data cleansing, spin analytics. So when we were parsing the grammar, we weren't going to the level that you were. It was just very specific to, hey, am I buying printer paper or the paper tray or paper for the printer, being able to distinguish that. But I say that because, what you've described is taking it to the very next level where you're looking at full sentence structure, understanding the past tense, the nuances of the language, but then it sounds like you're also accounting for the context of that language.
Yeah,
and then,
no,
yeah.
I mean, absolutely. And, the field itself has moved so much in the past, 10 to 20 years.
Yeah.
That context is getting bigger and bigger. We used to go from words, phrases, sentences, paragraphs, whole document representations, whole dialogue representations. There's a whole thread of research on discourse parsing, dialogue structure parsing, which you really get a holistic view of what's happening between two or more agents in a conversation. And now, we're in the neural networks are, they're everywhere, and that's a different type of representation. It's not as discrete, but now we've grown that out: words, sentences, phrases, whole documents, whole dialogues. The context has grown, the way we represent things has grown, and they're just getting more and more powerful every day.
I want to just pivot a little bit on the maintenance, because when you're working with these customers, you're working with multiple languages, which there are many, and nuances within those languages, but also the fact that new words are being brought into discussions. So for example, if I looked at 10 years ago, the type of grammar that I was parsing, way different than what it is now. And then we've got new terms and new terminologies and new phrasing, and the grammar that I have, talking to you may be slightly different than how I'm typing it into, a call text or call center. So one of the things I wanted to understand is, as you're working with those customers, your relationship with those customers don't end when you get everything set up, and you've constantly got to be updating your content because their content is changing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's sort of two dimensions to this. One is kind of the discrete side of things. So when we have discrete representations, like meaning representation, sort of things, yes, the vocabulary changes. Customers, sometimes even change their name. They change product lines. If a customer is in a telco and they're a cable company, different shows come on. There's different fights are on, and people call into the call center asking about that, and the models have to understand that even though it hasn't seen that word before, it needs to map it on. And context there is important, right? Like, I'm trying to watch some show that you've never heard that word before. The fact that you're trying to watch it, the model should already figure out that, okay, this is likely a TV show or movie or something like that. But updating these meaning representations, in particular, anything that has a taxonomy to account for new things is critical. And we always have to do it. Like you said, when we launch with a new customer, that's day zero. That's just the start. It's constantly moving. But the other dimension, and I just mentioned this, is, the world has moved, or AI has moved to neural networks. And a lot of the way we represent dialogues and language is through neural networks. And that's actually a very nice way to handle this problem. So we don't have these discrete issues where we haven't seen a word before. We represent text by the context that it occurs in. it just kind of naturally falls out. And we can rely on things like, large language models, right? Pre-training large language models, BERT, GPT-3, what have you, where as the language is changing over time, if we're constantly continuing to train these models, we're going to be adapting to the new language. And it's easier for the AI that we're going to put on top of them to adapt as well.
You mentioned just now GPT-3, but I understand that you also have a point of view on the impact of GPT-4.
It's not so much a a point of view, but it's my general view about all of these things, GPT-3, I won't be specific about the language model or whatnot, T5, GPT-3. My general point of view is that these are very important tools in our toolbox.
Okay.
They make dramatic improvements in our ability to understand language. But, and this kind of ties back to what I mentioned earlier. One thing I realized when I first started productionizing machine learning and putting it in front of people is there's still a lot of work to be done from the model to getting something that is robust and is not going to fail spectacularly. The sort of last mile issue with artificial intelligence. And generally, the way I see this is large language models play this foundational role that we build on top of, but a lot of the value added in enterprise AI companies is on the innovations that happen around them in order to inject, domain-specific knowledge into those models, to do things like controlling them in the right ways, and also understanding what are the right moments, the perfect right moments to make a recommendation to an agent, let's say, so that they use it. It doesn't distract them, right? We can't just recommend things to agents all the time because we can have the negative effect. If those recommendations are bad or distracting, then we can, all of a sudden the performance indicators we care about can go the opposite way. So that research and innovation around them to really up the game of the services we're offering. That's my general attitude is like, let's use large language models. They're great, but also let's not forget all of that and the user experience, the things that when you really bring them together is what adds value for AI services.
So the right information at the right time, but when it has the most impact to be used. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
You mentioned briefly about innovations, and I know your company has 5 patents. Not going to ask you about the patents, but what I can ask you is 5 patents is actually fairly a lot, within a short period of time. And I'm sure you guys have been working on it for quite some time, but what's in general, what are those patents? What are you innovating that's taking you further along than maybe somebody else that's in your space who doesn't have any patents?
Yeah. So, I mean, the company, so ASAPP has been around since 2015, 2016. We have been working on these problems quite a long time. And I mean, the innovations that we really try to focus on are exactly what I mentioned before, right? So I think all of the patents, I couldn't list them off.
Yeah, that's fine. I read them. Don't worry about it. Yeah.
Many of them happened before I joined ASAPP. I'm sure I've read them all at some point, and there's more coming for sure. But more around when you're delivering an AI service, how do you do it in a way that is at the right time, at the right speed, and with the right accuracy, right? So we have a lot of patents around in digital care. One way to save a lot of time is to give agents suggestions on what to say next, right? Because typing takes a long time. So if you can do a really good job there, that's good. But of course, they have to read those suggestions, right? And so having the models in the right way so that the accuracy is very, very high, the user experience in the right way. So reading them doesn't take them off their critical path, but also a lot of work around neural network architectures that are fast enough that can run in real time so that there's no lag. As the customer enters what they want to say, we're making suggestions to the agent in 50 milliseconds before they can even realize anything's happened, that they realize that the customer's finished their message. The AI is already returning suggestions. And yeah, a lot of our innovations are really focused in that space and customer care specific outcomes as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. No, I appreciate the response, because I think what's interesting is I know personally how long it takes to go through the patent process and the amount of effort that the patent research teams are doing in comparing, say, your patent details with others to make sure that there is no patent out there that's exactly like yours. So I think it's interesting, and I think it's relevant to note that when we have these AI companies out here that they're innovating, that it's one thing to innovate and bring things to the market, but I think it's a whole nother layer that you have the innovation to the extent that it can be patented. So that's why I brought it up. So thank you. Yeah.
And actually, I will say one of the main reasons that I joined ASAPP was the company's culture has innovation sort of, at the heart. And they really believe that having a large research group, a lot of people who have expertise in machine learning and natural language processing isn't just for show. It's, it's the foundation of building all of our services. And you see that in patents for sure. Not only that we're working on technologies that can be patented, but also equally importantly, you see that in the academic output of the company. We publish at all the major machine learning and natural language processing conferences. Last year at Empirical Methods in Natural Language Processing, one of our papers received the Outstanding Paper Award, and that was on, actually, funny enough, architectures, neural network architectures that are sample efficient and really, really fast, can return suggestions in the right amount of speed. And I think that attracted me. I mean, not only am I an AI researcher, but I've seen in the past when companies are committed to that level of innovation, they can really sort of transform the space.
Yeah. So just one question before we wrap up.
Yeah.
What, given what you've seen so far, is there a really interesting use case that you could highlight that now with technology you were able to help solve, versus you have the unique experience that you've been in this space for more than 10 years that you couldn't solve 10 years ago?
Yeah. So I'll speak very broadly.
Yeah.
I mean, the one thing, if I look at today versus 10 years ago, I mean, there's so much that's happened. So
even 5 years ago. Yeah.
Even 5 years ago, I could fill up an hour of things that we can do now that we couldn't do back then. And I'm constantly amazed. But, the one thing that I always get very excited about is, large language models, but generative models, right? Our ability to not just make classifications, say, oh, this conversation is about a broken phone, or this conversation is about slow internet or something like that. But to actually generate text, and there's all sorts of applications for that, right? What might the agent say next? How are they going to wrap up their summary? Certainly outside of customer care, intelligent document writing and things like this. It's just the sky's the limit. And if you had asked me 5 years ago, would I be working for companies that use these kinds of technologies, critically throughout our services, I would have laughed. I wouldn't have been able to believe it. But now I'm insanely bullish. It's like everywhere we should do it. It's amazing what we can do. Now, it's not a solved problem. There's still tons of research out there to be done, and tons of work on putting the right safety nets around these things so that they don't distract people or do undesirable things. But it's amazing the progress that's happened in the field.
Yeah. It'd be interesting to have you come back in about a year and a half and ask that same question and see what's changed.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up, I think you have a very unique perspective with your technology research background, and then applying that now to ASAPP in a production environment. So my question to you is, do you have any lessons learned or takeaways that you'd like to leave behind for those listening who may have the similar research back end, but maybe didn't realize that there's other paths, to their career journey?
Yeah, absolutely. main lesson, I think, is that there are problems everywhere that research can be applied to. The kind of research that we do in machine learning and natural language processing is not, should not be exclusive to universities. There's so many problems out there, things that, I would have never realized when I first got into the space. And once I was in the space, I think, I mentioned this earlier, the biggest lesson is, getting the work I'm doing, the modeling I'm doing in front of people as quickly as possible, and understanding what happens once you really put that hypothesis to the test in real situations. And I'm always amazed at how often my expectations were wrong. What I expected to happen just didn't come to fruition. And there was a whole other set of problems that manifest themselves once I put that technology in front of users. And, it took me a long time to learn that lesson, not to guess what the problems are going to be too much, but to work on real empirical feedback from people using the technology, and understanding that last mile issue, and building intuitions around that having a model with great accuracy, a machine learning model with great accuracy on an academic data set is an accomplishment for sure. But putting it in front of real users where it's going to get used, hundreds of times a second, thousands of times a second, whatever it is a totally different set of research challenges that are interesting themselves, but have to be overcome.
Perfect. That's perfect. Thank you so much. And thank you again for taking time out of your day to chat with us.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. I'm very happy to do it.